responsible for all of the problems we faced in the 20th century and some of them that we still face today. So, welcome to my presentation on Woodrow Wilson. Thesis for this presentation. Woodrow Wilson was the worst president we have ever had and left the country far worse than he found it. I really do think that you'll come to my side once you realize how bad he actually was. Because the vast majority of the country, all we really remember Woodrow Wilson was as is the guy who led us in World War I and the 14 points. But I'll get to those in a second. One of the worst travesties associated with Woodrow Wilson is the Lost Cause myth, otherwise known as New South revisionism. It has been called that in a long time. Basically, you can blame Woodrow Wilson for every single person that you hear. It is heritage, not hate. I honestly almost don't blame them, because Woodrow Wilson is an accredited historian. Somebody who would become a president. And he argued this. And it would come to influence his presidency. He grew up during the Civil War. Ended up siding with the South because he grew up in the South. Coming on to the side of slavery and the Southern cause, blah, blah, blah. And he grew to hate the federal government as well. But a little fun fact is he hated the South for its failures too. But I don't think that that's worth anything. But it would affect his presidency. So for first, during his campaign for the presidency, the big idea was this new liberty, which was basically a smokescreen for the expansion of the federal government, which is sort of ironic, seeing as the fact that he hated it. The idea behind it was, well, the supposed idea behind it was that American liberties needed to be protected by the federal government. And so the expansion of power was the obvious solution, but it really wasn't. But I'm a libertarian, obviously I'm going to think that. But Wilson promised equality and better racial relations. And so his idea of this was to quietly let his cabinet start segregating the federal workforce, which at this time was probably one of the last bastions of true equality, or at least semi-equality, that black Americans had in the early 20th century. He even screened Birth of a Nation at the White House. And if you don't know what that film is, it is one of the most racist films. And due to Wilson and this film, the second KKK was born. He screened it at the White House, and his comments on the film were this: "It is like writing history with lightning, and my only regret is that it is so terribly true." Problem there is that this film presented the KKK as the good guys and perpetuated black stereotypes and black people as the villains of the situation, which they definitely were not. And it helped foster the second KKK, and I think we all know where it goes from there. So, move on. Second worst, which, now that I'm thinking about it, these are probably the only things he actually did. They're all bad. So, Wilsonian interventionism. If you haven't heard of that word by now, now you have. It is completely and utterly important for today's society. When everybody starts complaining about us in the Middle East or in other countries, they are talking about Wilsonian interventionism. He started us there. Before Wilson, we were a colonial empire. After Wilson, we were people who put troops everywhere to make safe the world for democracy. Where have you heard that one before? Let's get to it. So, under his policies, in 1914 he invaded Mexico because Germany was influencing Mexico's elections. So Wilson invaded a country because another country was influencing that country's elections. That's probably one of the dumbest things I've ever heard, but I continue. He then denied the legitimacy of the Haitian government and then invaded the entire island, threw out the regime, and replaced it with a new one. Now, to us, doesn't sound like much, does it? That was the first time we had ever done anything like that in our history, through military force, of course. And it failed. Our first attempt at it failed, and then we kept doing it. And here we are today. And it all started with this guy, Wilson. Probably the biggest asshole to ever exist. But I continue. And this one's big for me. Presidential tyranny under Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson enacted two big no-nos to the Constitution. The Espionage Act and the Sedition Act, which the only comparison that I can find throughout history for these is the Patriot Act. And most of us know what that is, and if you don't, you should look it up. It's probably the biggest trampling of civil liberties since Wilson. I'll get to that. So, these acts made it illegal to talk anything bad about the government. You know, everybody likes to hate on Trump. Under these policies, every single person that talked bad about Trump, or the military, or the Navy, the flag, the Constitution, would all be immediately arrested. This dude did that. It gets worse. The Sedition Act pretty much just made everything more brutal from the Espionage Act. And the specifics were the Constitution, the flag, the Navy, the Army, the government, form of government, and the president, and the war. But the bad thing was, is Wilson had been asking for this before the war. And that's the bad thing. Because when you think about it, if this guy was enacting policies, or was trying to enact policies, my bad, before the war, and then just use the war as an excuse, I mean, that's tyranny. It is. It is. There were over 1,000 convictions in this time, not to mention the countless people that were charged and arrested, but only 1,000 were convicted. But these, and I'll show you how these inevitably led to the Patriot Act. These acts helped foster two domestic spying agencies. The American Protective League, which is where the founder of the FBI got a start. No surprise there. And the rebranding of the MID, the Military Intelligence Division, which it had already existed, but it was pointed outward, not inward. Because, you know, we have a little thing called the First Amendment, but that's whatever, apparently. These organizations' sole purpose were to keep the American populace subjugated to the war effort. it was illegal to talk anything bad about anything relating to the government or the military. And the amount of civil liberties that were violated by these groups would make our modern government blush today. Some extra things. Those were my 3 main points. But some extra things. The 14 points in the League of Nations. And these are some things that you might not have heard about, or might not have even thought about. The 14 points all had ulterior motives. The opening of trade prevented smaller economies from protecting themselves. Colonialism was banned, but would only be replaced with countries' different forms of Wilsonian interventionism, which Wilson created. And Wilson would regularly violate his 14 points. Look at the Russian intervention, which pretty much led to the Cold War. So there's one. Wilson pretty much caused the Cold War. We can thank him for nearly destroying the country. Then the League of Nations. So instead of Wilson actually helping any Americans in his last 2 to 3 years of the presidency, he spent it trying to get the League off the ground. And he never joined the League. He just wanted other countries to play in a toy box. The League. Now, Wilson technically didn't have anything to do with this, but he created the League, which this would have never happened had not. So one of the combatants in World War I was the Ottoman Empire. Pretty much the remnants of the Persian Empire from ancient history. Controlled pretty much the entire Middle East. But when they fell, the League divided the Middle East amongst what Europeans wanted in forms of oil or resources, which is why the Kurdish don't have a country, why you have so many different ethnic groups that fight with each other in certain countries. I mean, think about it. Every time you hear about a Middle Eastern country, what's going on? Israel, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the list goes on, right? This is because of what he did. He created the League of Nations, which then created this problem. Also, a big one. The League of Nations pretty much fostered World War II. With all the harsh punishments on the German people, which didn't deserve it. It was the German government that deserved it, not the German people. And for causing World War I, it made everyone extremely poor, miserable. They grew to hate each other, and it basically fostered the Nazis, which fostered World War II. So there's another one. So, yeah. Some other things he ignored. There's actually a year in American history that we could compare to how crazy this one's been. 2020's been a trip, but 1919 was worse. You had women's suffrage, racial violence, the Red Scare of 1919, and so on and so forth. And instead of doing anything about any of those problems, Wilson sat on his ass and tried to get the League of Nations created, which inevitably led to all of those other problems that we just talked about. So, yeah. And now on to my conclusion. Wilson's legacy is everything bad that has ever happened since his presidency. And that's kind of impressive. But it also makes him the worst president we've ever had. And possibly the worst human being to ever live. That's my opinion, though. I'm sure you can find some people in Georgia. And through this presentation, I have explained the awful things Wilson did with his presidency. And you might ask, well, did he do anything good? Like at all? Not really. But there was kind of one. he did try and block prohibition, which was anti-liberty. So I'll give him that one, but he didn't succeed. Congress overrode him. So there's that. The one good thing he tried to do. And that's it. I've listed his actions, and they kind of speak for themselves. His racist actions, his imperialistic actions, his tyrannical actions. He became the worst president we've ever had, and would leave scars on the United States that we still face today. If it wasn't for him, arguably, the Cold War wouldn't have happened. World War II wouldn't have happened. The anti-communist thing wouldn't have ever happened. We wouldn't be imprisoning people for talking, which was a travesty. Racial relations might be way better than they are today. He literally did everything he could to leave the country worse than he left it, and when he got it. All of the problems, domestic and abroad, that we have faced through the 20th and 21st century are arguably because of Wilson's policies and Wilson's attitudes. All of this is his fault. And nobody wanted to elect Teddy Roosevelt. These are my sources. Feel free to leave a comment below. Tell me how I did. This is my first time posting an actual face video on YouTube. It's for a project that I am doing for my history class. I hope that y'all enjoyed it. As of right now, I seem to be the only one that's posted, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I hope you enjoyed. Go do your own research on Wilson. You'll see. He's a bad dude. Have a good day.